Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for your patience. I just want to welcome you all to our webinar. And just a little background, and well, as you can see, if you're on the phone, please mute your speaker, but you will be able to unmute if you have questions as we move along. We are in the process, and we've got several board members on here, and this actually was specifically tailored to them. We are in the process of working with the board to create a strategic plan that will set the direction for the state in going forward in providing workforce and training services. And so this is the first in what's going to be a series of those webinars. And we were based on a survey. WIOA 101, WIOA, 101 came up as the main topic, and then we're also going to be doing one on partner services. We're going to be doing one specifically to service delivery and a one-stop, and we'll also be doing one on training providers and performance. So those are just a few that we've got in the works for later on. This really is going to just be a high-level WIOA 101. For some of you, it will be a refresher. For some of you, it will be some new information. And I'm going to ask Mark. He'll be flipping the slides along for us. So we'll go to the first slide. And this is just really a couple of dot points to remind you that it was signed in 2014. It did have broad bipartisan support. It does not just amend the previous Workforce Act, but it did replace it. And it replaced it in a lot of areas, which we'll talk about today, but I think the strongest one was the emphasis on sector and employment-based training. Excuse me, sector and employment-based training. Next slide, please. We wanted just to take an opportunity to show you how the funds flow down for WIOA. And what are the policy opportunities? And we start at the federal level, and every year Congress appropriates our money. That money is issued to us through the U.S. Department of Labor, specifically for WIOA. The other program partners, many of them receive their funds through Department of Education or Health and Human Services, etc. But specific to WIOA, most of the guidance is coming out of Department of Labor and the Department of Education. And it's interesting, the federal fiscal year for us is actually October 1st to September 30th, but the program year aligns with our state fiscal year, which is July 1st to June 30th. Once the act was signed, then both departments started working on specific regulations for implementing the act, and those came out late last year in 2016. So the money, as I said, passed down to the state, and then the state is responsible for creating policy letters, and then also those policy letters come from the Workforce Innovation Board, and then also the governor's office and state agencies. And we pass that money down to the regional and local area. There are 10 economic development regions throughout the state, and right now we currently have 22 local workforce innovation boards. I just wanted to remind everyone what the federal and state visions are. Those of you that were at the board meeting, we did go over these at the March meeting. But just as a reminder, WIOA is really about achieving and maintaining integrated job-driven workforce system that links our workforce to the nation's businesses. And then from that, as a reminder, back in August of 2015, we held a statewide leadership academy, and the National Governors Association came in and facilitated that, and we came up with, and it had just members of the governor's office, members of our IWIB, our state agency partners, and we all came together and then came up with this vision for workforce, and you can read it, so I don't need to repeat it. Next slide, Mark. Hallmarks of WIOA, and I think this is where we really start getting into what's what is really the more larger vision for WIOA, or what ties to the vision, and that's, of course, the business-driven approach. Regional economies have been a big thing under WIOA, and actually were not under WIA. And then the one-stop services and the one-stop centers are the place where our services get delivered. The goals for WIOA, of course, is to increase education, employment, and training. We certainly want to create a high-quality workforce that meets the business's needs. We really are trying to focus more and be data-driven, and many of us have had those conversations around everything we need to do needs to be based on data. And we've got some things going on around that. One of our initiatives is longitudinal data study, where that has brought all of the partners together to start looking at data characteristics and how we can use that data in a better way. We also, at the board level, have an evaluation and accountability work group that is also going to be looking at data and how that data informs improvements to the system. And we're also looking at how we increase prosperity for our workers and our employers, and then how do we reduce welfare dependency. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but one of the other main changes under WIOA is a priority of service for low-income and low-skilled adults.
Lisa was pretty anxious to get started here, so I want to just do a couple things before we move on to the next slide. For those of you that aren't familiar with the chat pod, if you want to make a comment, ask a question, you can use the chat pod on the left. But we do have telephone lines open, so if you want to stop us at any point, please do, and go ahead and speak up and ask us those questions or make those comments. But I did want to recognize, for those of you joined us today, that we do have representatives from the other four core partners on the line. So also, if you, Doug Morden, Karen Hunter-Anderson, or Quinetta, if you would like to add anything at any point in time specific to your programs, please don't hesitate to stop and join us. But our main presenter today is Lisa Jones from the Department of Commerce, and I, Mark Burgess, will be facilitating the slides throughout today's presentation.
So I guess this is a good point to ask questions because we're moving on to the next section. So if anyone has any questions about any of that, I'll just, please let us know. If not, we'll go ahead and get started on the next section, which is addressing governance provisions. And this is, governance provisions are, of course, across here we have outlined what the governor's responsibilities are related to WIOA. And we've already done the state agency designation, which is, of course, Department of Commerce. We have been under WIA, we're the designated state workforce agency, sorry. And then we also have the State Workforce Innovation Board, which is appointed by the governor, and in Illinois, it's actually confirmed by the Senate. That is not a requirement of WIOA for Senate confirmation, but that is in an Illinois law. The governor is also responsible for setting the local Workforce Innovation Board member appointments. It's primarily based on what's included in the Act. It is also very similar to what the membership of the State Workforce Innovation Board is. Policy and guidance, we've been working on local board certification. We've done some MOU guidelines, which are really about how the partners are going to work together in the one-stop system. And then infrastructure funding has also been a big part of WIOA, and we have a slide that we'll talk about that in a little bit later. And designation of regions and local areas, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But as I said, the regional designation, we had them actually under WIA, and back in 2003, the governor and that administration really created those economic development regions, and we have adopted those as we've moved forward. We're also in the process from a board level of looking at the current structure of the regions, and based on updated data, where do we still align in the same way as we used to? And there's a requirement under WIOA that not only do we redesignate the regions, but if a local area falls within 2 economic development regions, there has to be a decision between the state, the board, and the chief elected officials on which planning region the local area will align with. And then there's also a requirement that we certify the local boards every 2 years. And we've done that process this past year, and so we're looking at 2018 to update the certification process. The next set of responsibilities are the board responsibilities. And those are really around 4 major areas: planning, the aligning of funds in the system. There's some administrative responsibilities, and then program oversight. I think as planning, the big one is really around, there's a couple of areas, I think, the development of policy and reviewing that statewide policy and program specific to the workforce system. The state plan, we finished the state plan and submitted it in 2016. We may have to modify the state plan based on the final strategic plan, and then there's also a requirement under WIOA that the state plan be updated by next year. And then, of course, the other planning opportunity that's the responsibility of the board is around designation, which I just said a minute ago. And then system alignment, we're looking at how we distribute the formula funds, what are the strategies for technology and data. That's a significant change in WIOA. It's coordinated intake and then also using a common system so customers are not going to have to give their information 5 or 6 times. And then how do you refer in a seamless process? And then, of course, I kind of just touched on that because that really speaks to service integration. Certainly, you're going to, in the administrative capacity, you're going to provide some guidance on the MOU, the one-stop certification. Our executive committee just recently finished approving the one-stop certification, and we have released that policy. We had a policy work group that came up with those certifications, and we had a great representation of board members, chief elected officials, and our partners at the table to come up with those certification criteria. And then program oversight, is really about performance measures. What are some best practices that are out there that we can share across the state, but then also nationally? And then career pathway development. What does career pathways look like in Illinois? And I think that's important from a business perspective, so you can help set that direction. Just real quickly, I wanted to show you all what the membership structure is, and business, we know, is the key. It's 51%, which is consistent with what it was under the previous legislation. And then there's the workforce representation, which is labor organizations, and registered apprenticeship is also required, and then that can also include our youth provider and other types of individuals that are in workforce services. Other required members are the governor's office. Then we also in WIOA have to have a member from each chamber of the state legislature. However, in Illinois, we have to have 2 from each chamber. And right now, the Democratic leadership of both the House and the Senate appoint those 2 people, and then also the Republican leadership appoint 2. We also have to have a chief elected official, as well as state officials that are responsible for the primary programs or core programs, which is Title I, which is the workforce development, Title II, which is adult education, Title III, which is housed in IDES and provides UI and employment services, and then Department of Human Services, vocational rehabilitation. We also have several ex officio members that are appointed by the governor specific to economic development, and Innovate Illinois participates. as a board member, and then we have several education entities that are also serving as ex officios, as well as other programs in the Department of Human Services outside of vocational rehabilitation. The primary program partners, which I call them primary programs only because when you say core programs, it makes me kind of scratch my head at times. So this is these are their responsibilities, and they really are doing activities that the governor designates them to do. And one of the things, and right now this occurs through the interagency work group that meets on a monthly basis, and they're really sitting around and talking about what does implementation look like on the ground, and not only on the ground, but what does it mean for each agency, and how do we do implementation within our respective agencies when we each have different policy and guidance that we must adhere to. Of course, the 4 primary partners, they're representing the state agencies in the IWIB, and then I spoke a little bit about designating the program and ensuring alignment of services, and then they're also included in facilitating and supporting the MOU negotiations, and they were responsible on behalf of the governor of setting those guidelines. And I've already spoke to the primary program partner state agencies and where they are housed. So I don't think I need to really go over that again, except that Job Corps Youth Build is also authorized as a program partner under WIOA. Those programs are really just where they're situated. So it's not like we have Youth Build all over the state. Those are grants that are specific to certain areas. Responsibilities of the board, just as the state board has responsibilities, so does the local board, and their functions are really around strategic planning, system capacity building, and alignment and effective operations. They're very similar to what we do at the state level around formulating the local plan, looking at research and the labor market analysis to determine what services should be provided, as well as what types of training are needed based on the business demand, and finally, what populations are in a particular region/local area that we need to direct more services to. So an example of that might be there could be in one local area for a particular time period more unemployed workers or dislocated workers than the adult, the low-income, low-skilled. Or it could be vice versa, that there's more low-income, low-skilled adults. And they might have a high percentage of persons with disabilities. So that would be a population that you would target to make sure that you've got the appropriate services. Capacity building is really promoting best practices. It's really how do we engage employers in a more proactive way so that the training programs are really designed to meet those needs. And then, of course, just the effective operation of the one-stop. And as you can see, the membership is similar to the state board. Of course, again, the business majority, the workforce representation, and then state partners, economic development, and community-based organizations. There also is discussed within the Act, and we do this at the state level and at the local level, is promoting standing committees, and they can be various standing committees based on what the need is in the particular EDR or economic development region or local area. And then at the state level, we also have set some standing committees and task forces. The local area designation we touched on a little bit. Here's how designation occurs. So, of course, it's consistent with the labor market information, and I mentioned that with the economic development regions as well. When WIOA was first enacted and we began implementation, there was a requirement within the law that any local area that wanted to maintain their designation for the first 2 years could do that. There was one, couple of requirements. They had to perform successfully, which is basically meeting their performance requirements of wages, retention, and employment. And they had to had to sustain fiscal integrity. We, of course, everybody met that, and so we have continued forward on our current local workforce areas. Subsequent designation, again, it includes performing successfully and sustaining in fiscal integrity. And then this is where, as part of redesignation, that we've started the discussions in the executive committee is how do you align the local areas with the economic development regions. And it's interesting, and we'll talk about this in the larger board meeting, but there has been some shifts in how things look. And we do have 6 or 7 counties that we're really going to have to do a deeper dive into those counties to align them with the appropriate economic development regions. And of course, if the governor can work with the state board, if a particular set of counties want to come together and ask for designation. So one of the things under the previous legislation was that populations of 500,000 or more were automatically designated as a local area. That is no longer the case under WIOA. Regional collaboration, I've continued to mention this throughout this presentation and probably will reinforce it as we go along. This is really at a regional level. How are we going to align our workforce services with what we're seeing in the regional economy? And then we talked about how we've already identified our regions. And then what do we need to do regionally as well as locally to coordinate with our employers, our one-stop partners, economic development being a key to that, and then certainly education and training is another important role that we need to look at. How do we provide that service delivery and work with our community colleges and other training providers? State planning is also one of the responsibilities of the board that I want to talk about under governance, because this sets the direction for workforce services in Illinois. It's really about alignment of the core programs, and there is a specific requirement well, it's not a requirement, but there is language within the Act that lets the state choose whether they want to create a unified plan for just the primary programs, or if they want to include other programs such as the Career and Tech Ed program, Carl Perkins, also the TANF program, that could be included in the state plan. And if that is the case, then that becomes what is referred to in the Act as a combined plan. Of course, our planning, a big component of that is career pathways. How do we avoid duplication of services is a big one, and that's certainly important in light of the fact of the current state budget as well as just the dwindling resources at the federal level. Regional and local planning, again, this is really just a step down from what we do at the state level. Those plans have to align with what we're saying in the state plan. They have to demonstrate how they coordinated regionally. Boards have to be high performing, which is those of you that are on the state board know we've been talking about that quite a bit. How do we implement new approaches, and what are we doing to increase our work-based activities? And those are submitted every 4 years to the governor, but certainly there's a requirement because a plan should be a living document that if things change within your local area or within the state, that your plans are modified, and then for us, we submit those to the Department of Labor and Department of Education at the federal level, and then at the regional and local level, it's just submitted to the governor. And then this just demonstrates how the plans flow. What we do, the state plan provides the guidance. The regional plan is coordinating services within the economic development region, and then, of course, the local plan is really the nuts and bolts in how things will be implemented through the one-stop system at the local level. Next slide. Okay, sorry. Accountability and transparency, huge, huge, huge. We've talked a lot about it within the executive committee. I know we're talking about it a lot within the IWIB strategic planning, as well as at the local level. Data-driven is the key, and we really want to focus on becoming more data-driven. And then in addition to that, the federal act requires specific common performance measures, which this is still being worked on with the partners because some of the partners did not have the performance measures that are currently required in the act, which is entered employment, retained employment, wages, credential attainment, what is the measurable skills gain, and then the other one that was added is effectiveness of services to employers. And under WIA, that was actually, you were able to, from the Title I perspective, get a waiver to not do that survey of employers, but now it's mandatory under WIOA. And then the other real big shift that occurred, and I guess it's a shift only because they're now putting the feet to the fire on this one, is the eligible training providers and them providing data on performance outcomes. And the key here is all students in the training program. Under WIA, we really only looked at training performance in terms of those that were enrolled in the program. And this has kind of been a struggle with us, honestly, is how are we going to get that all-student data, and who is included as an all-student when you've got some folks attending a training or a community college in ones and twosies classes.
What's the issue with Meyer now in Illinois?
Okay, next slide. Oh, Mark is pointing out that I failed to mention that states are sanctioned 5% of our governor's reserve, which is the 15% money, if at any time we fail performance. And I think the other thing to mention there, it's failed performance regardless of the program. So it's kind of like we're all in, I mean, definitely one way to demonstrate we're all in this together. Are there any questions about the governance issues? Or I guess I would like to know if, you know, Doug or Quinetta or Karen, if you have anything that you would like to add around governance. Okay.
You're doing fine.
Okay, thanks. The next section that we're going to get into more is the one-stop delivery system and what that looks like. And we've already talked about the 4 primary partners, but in addition to that, there are several other programs that are mandated by the Act to participate and provide services in the one-stop at the local level. And we split these out so you could see the agencies that that currently oversee and administer those programs. And here at the Department of Commerce, we also have the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program, which provides services to workers that are displaced by foreign trade. And that doesn't just include direct foreign trade. If I'm a secondary company that received or worked with the top-level company that's being laid off or moving outside of the country, they're also eligible for those services. And then the Community Services Block Grant, which is operated through community action agencies, and they provide a host of services, some of which are also our partners, like they can help provide housing support, they do employment services, and they also have some other supportive services they provide in addition. And then Career and Tech Education is a partner under ICCB, in addition to, of course, our Adult Ed, which is a primary partner. IDES, you know, Department of Employment Security, certainly UI is a big component of what they do. They also have veterans programs under there, and then the Migrant Seasonal Farm Workers program is also housed under there. The Migrant Seasonal Farm Worker program really is only required, well, not really, it's only required to provide services in those areas where they have a seasonal farm worker program. So it's one of those, if like in central Illinois, in a small community called Beardstown, they have a program, but there's some areas downstate that they might not have a program, or in the northern part of the state. DHS, in addition to voc rehab, we have temporary assistance for needy families, which is the cash assistance benefit, and then a food stamp employment and training, which really primarily focuses on individuals that are without children. And they also, both of those, of course, as you know, or may not know, they provide, in addition to cash assistance and food stamp benefits referred to as SNAP, they also do supportive services. The last group of services, which I can't see, and I'm not following my, is HUD, Job Corps, which I talked about, Senior Services Employment Plan, Community Program. Second Chance is also a program that, I apologize, got left off of here. Second Chance is a program through the Department of Corrections. And again, it's one of those programs that is not statewide. It is specific to communities, and they would only provide one-stop services through, or workforce services through the one-stop system at those areas. We talked a little bit and touched on, as we were discussing the responsibilities of the governor, et cetera, the boards and the local areas, the MOU. And the MOU, they've been working on those at the local level, for your information. Those are really focused on how are we going to provide our services and coordinate through the one-stop system. You know, who's going to pay for what? You know, who's going to pay for what? Who's going to provide a service on site? Who's going to provide a service through technology? Are some of the things that they're looking at and including in the Memorandum of Understanding. The other significant one that is certainly been a little sticky one for us, as it was not required under WIA, is the one-stop center infrastructure cost. And those are really the nuts and bolts, the bricks and mortar of, you know, who's paying for the lease and some of those other costs associated with infrastructure. And I touched a little bit on other shared services and costs, and then referral methods among partners. The MOUs have to be reviewed every 3 years, but they don't necessarily have to be updated if everything remains in place the way you're currently serving the customers and splitting up the cost. Infrastructure funding, I just mentioned that a couple of different times. The governor has to provide guidance on the infrastructure costs. There's also a requirement within the Act on infrastructure costs that if a particular local area can't come to an agreement among the partners about their share and who's going to pay what, the state is required in each of the primary partners as well as the other required partners to set aside some funding then to pick up those infrastructure costs. Local boards negotiate that with the one-stop partners, and I talked a little bit about the state infrastructure mechanism, and then of course the local MOUs are required to describe that in their documents. One-stop centers, this of course is where all the work gets done and all the services are provided within the one-stop system. I want to be clear about that. And then the requirement by law is that you have to have one comprehensive center that provides the access to the service. And then certainly many of our areas have satellite offices just based on the mere fact of the rural areas. You know, it's too far for some to drive to Mount Vernon. And then in the Chicago area, just transportation, and they've located affiliate sites throughout the Cook County area. Another thing to mention about the affiliate sites that's tied to infrastructure funding, and certainly one that we are discussing at the state level, is affiliate sites are now included in infrastructure funding costs. And the Department of Labor actually issued that guidance after most states had already determined their infrastructure funding requirements in addition to what's within the Act and the regulations. Boards have to certify the one-stops every 3 years. I mentioned earlier that the state Workforce Board has already established those criteria, and the local workforce investment areas or innovation areas are right now in the process of certifying centers based on that criteria. And then the other significant requirement that is under WIOA is a selected competitive process to select the one-stop operator. And it has to be, the competitive process is, it's a very complex process. You have to follow procurement of your local area, of course, and then any federal guidance that is included in the Office of Management Budget Circular around competition. There is an opportunity for local workforce boards to apply as a one-stop operator, and then clearly if in a situation like that, it's best to hire an outside entity, or you need somebody that's removed from the board membership or the board process to procure those services and evaluate who gets chosen. Integrated service delivery is really important in the One-Stop Center. It's talked about in the MOU, it's talked about in the plan, and in the particular order of the plan and then the MOUs. It's really about, which I've mentioned a few times, it's really about how do we, share our resources in a way that we're leveraging each of the partner services. Wagner, the employment services piece that is housed in IDES now has to be centered within the one-stop. That is a change from WIA. There is also a requirement now that, or it's not a requirement, it was a streamlining of services. Prior to WIOA, they had separated out services based on career readiness and then more intense support services. Now they've streamlined that and they have a category of career services just in general. And they did that because there was, and I don't want to say a misunderstanding, but there was certainly in some particular areas, and not just in Illinois, but nationally, they thought that they had to do career readiness services before they could do those more intense services. And that was really not the intent of the law, but like I said, in many areas, that's how it played out. So they wanted to clean that language up so that it was clear that as I was doing on my own some job search, other services might be available to me if I'm enrolled in the program. And then the integrated intake and case management, that's a couple of different levels. That's how do we operationalize it from a physical standpoint and the referral process and the mechanisms within the local one-stop, but it's also about the technology and how do we create an integrated system via technology that ensures accountability and maintains fiscal integrity. Priority of service. This is new under WIOA. Under WIA, the priority of services was limited to veterans. It is now expanded for those that are basic skills deficient, along with a low-income job seeker, and also public assistance recipients for adult programs is a priority. And they did expand the definition for basic skills, and that expansion included being unable to function either on your job, within your family, or society. And I think that primarily speaks to folks that English is not their first language. They did define individuals with a barrier to employment, and individuals with a barrier to employment is part of the eligibility process for specifically Title I services. And under WIA, they had to have multiple barriers. Now they only have, one is the minimum that they have to have. So if they're low income and need child care, or they're low income and they're homeless, or one low income and a youth that's in foster care. And again, it expanded the definition of a homeless individual based on two specific acts. And then the low income criteria was brought in, and this was exciting for Illinois because we really, as part of our reauthorization efforts when we were meeting with congressional delegates, pushed for free and reduced lunch criteria as for eligibility purposes. And then they did some clarification around individuals with disabilities and the income thresholds that they need to meet to be enrolled in WIOA services. Access to youth services were expanded greatly. A significant change was identifying 20% of your youth funds for work-based learning or work activities such as summer jobs, on-the-job training, and internships. And pre-apprenticeship is also a high priority for not only the state, but also at the federal level. Here in Illinois, we have an apprenticeship committee that is currently convened, and it is a committee of the Workforce and Innovation Board, and it's also a priority of the governor's office. And they're looking at not just how do you expand pre-apprenticeship models that move youth from pre-apprenticeship to apprenticeship opportunities, but they've also now expanded that effort to include career readiness. Another shift was the percent of funds that had to be spent on out-of-school youth. That now has increased to at least 75%. Under the previous program, it was 30%. So that's been something that the local areas have had to really look at and shift their service delivery model to be able to meet that requirement. Out-of-school youth, the age was expanded from 16 to 24. That was consistent with when they had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act back in 2009. They did allow for a short time during that period to expand services to the 24-year-olds, and there was such a great need for that that they did include that in the new legislation. The in-school youth eligibility is now the free and reduced lunch price at school makes them eligible, and then English language learners and those who have a disability are also included as eligibility requirements without additional barriers. There is also the living in a high poverty area that's part of the low income criteria for youth activities. The next thing that I want to point out is our services to adults and youth with disabilities. Within WIOA, it's embedded everywhere in the Act, honestly, is an emphasis on employment opportunities for people with disabilities. And one of the things is really how do we increase access within the one-stop system that prepares them for what's termed competitive integrated employment. In Illinois, we have been working have had several projects with our Voc Rehab partner and looking at ways that we can do this. Illinois has been fortunate since about 2009, 2010, somewhere in there, to receive a grant from the Department of Labor that specifically addresses this issue. It's referred to as the Disability Employment Initiative. Another insurance, which is not just under WIOA, but also just within the American Disabilities Act, is to be physically accessible, also programmatically accessible. So you have to ensure that when a customer with a disability comes into the one-stop center, that programmatically they have the opportunity to receive our services or apply for our services. And then youth with disabilities are receiving extensive pre-employment transition services, which is also an expansion from under WIA. And I don't know, Doug, if you want to add anything to that or not?
Well, to me, this has been an ongoing process of opening up various parts of the workforce system to folks with disabilities. We've been very fortunate to partner with you folks at Commerce on the DEI and some other things in the last few years, and I just think the best we can keep going, whether we have the ODAP funding or not, is to make those partnerships keep going. And we're stressing to each of our local managers that sit on the local workforce boards that one of their main responsibilities is to make sure that they're, number one, keeping an eye on the service accessibility, but also making sure that we are a resource to the other folks in the local workforce team.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. Services to military veterans and spouses. Of course, as I mentioned, it's a priority of service for eligible veterans and spouses, so it's not just limited to veterans. This is actually a priority above all priorities. And then they've also included spouses of certain active duty members are included in the definition of dislocated workers. If they're displaced spouse, then they would also be eligible to come in and apply for services. Any questions on the one-stop system that anyone has? I hope I didn't run through that too quickly. Or Karen, if you would like to chime in, or Quinetta, if any of you have anything you would like to add to that. Okay. The next that we're going to talk about, and certainly we know that employer engagement is our first and foremost priority. So it wasn't put here last for any particular reason other than I sort of followed, the structure of how services are delivered. But with the emphasis on employer engagement, we really have to ensure that we are aligning education and workforce. And fortunately for Illinois, and Karen can certainly attest to this, we've been doing this for quite a few years, ensuring that we're aligning our two systems, and have had several projects together. One that was funded through an organization called the Joyce Foundation, where we created what are called bridge programs that are contextualized instruction along with occupational instruction. So if you're receiving remedial services or English as a second language service, then that also includes an occupational component in that. We also are looking at how we can expand our training and education options within our employer engagement models. And one of the things, we try to look at is are there accelerated ways to provide training? How do we do not just training in a bridge program that provides some sort of remediation and occupational training, but what are other ways that we can do that? Career pathways is certainly a large one, and one of the things that we're doing here in Illinois is we have looked at, and we have board members participating in this effort as well, is what is a standard framework for Illinois across the system in developing career pathways. So WIOA doesn't have a certain framework for career pathways, and then the education system have another one. And we're doing that from the secondary system all the way through the university system. And our hope is that we will get sign-on for this statewide framework from all of our respective boards and oversight entities. Karen, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I can add a number of things. I don't know if now is the best time or not, but I will say that, as part of our workforce education strategic plan that we are at the end of now, we're trying to do that. We've included a lot of essential skills development, work-based learning, and certainly to align all of this work that we're doing with the governor's priority for apprenticeships. So I think that's, certainly looking at the educational components that we offer and aligning them more closely with requirements of the workforce and the employers, I think is a little bit of a shift for us. And I don't know if Jennifer is on the line or not. I know she was on her way to D and was going to try to call in, so I don't know if she had anything to add either.
Her name on our list. And I don't think Brian is on either. And
No, he's in the office right now.
okay.
But it's also a part of the ICCB goals. Our board, for the first time in my history that I can remember, our board actually outlined some goals. And one of them was to, and as we get into career pathways, I think a little later, I'll be glad to add on to that.
Oh, great. The next slide, I went over really around education and workforce alignment. One, it's certainly a pillar of what we're doing around workforce services. Talked a little bit about the seamless progression from one stepping stone to another around career pathways. Karen mentioned how they're expanding work-based training in their, within the community colleges and their providers, and then really training that leads to an industry-recognized credential is certainly very important within the system. And having said that as well, another opportunity that we have here in Illinois that we're working on is defining what is a high-quality credential and what is included in that. So some of you may not know, but Illinois has a goal to have 60% I think it's up to age 25, and Karen can jump in here in a minute, that 60% of those have some sort of credential, industry-recognized credential or post-secondary education. The next slide, again, you've heard us talk about career pathways, and here explains briefly what it is. High-quality education, training, and other services. A model that Illinois is doing that I'll let Karen speak to more is integrated education and training. Certainly that's a board responsibility in looking at what strategies we want to do as a state around career pathways for our specific populations that we serve, and then what are the needed supportive services to ensure successful career pathways. And then, Karen, you want to add on to that?
Oh, well, you mentioned IETs, and one of the things that we've done is we just released the RS program, and we included some prioritizations in terms of what we wanted the applicants to consider or to include in their plans, and certainly IETs and career pathways developments and bridge programs, as you mentioned before, that we've been working on for a number of years, have all been included in there in order for either for any entity, whether it's a community college, a CBO, a literacy program, whoever wants to apply for these federal funds through the ICCB has to include those components, which is a great alignment with WIOA.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. Now we're going to get into more of, additional types of training, and work-based learning we've threaded throughout this presentation. But a couple of key things about work-based learning is there has been some expansion of the funds that can be used for wage reimbursement for particular types of work-based learning. Certainly on-the-job training increased. It's a sliding scale. Within the Act it says 50%, but the governor can choose to increase that reimbursement rate up to 75%, which Illinois has done. Incumbent worker training, and I kind of go over the various, I give you an idea of what are the various training options available in a later slide, but incumbent worker training prior to WIOA, you needed a waiver to be able to conduct incumbent worker training at the local level, and now it's an option under WIOA. And then as Karen mentioned, and then I mentioned, as far as pre-apprenticeship, registered apprenticeship programs is also a priority, again, nationally, as well as a governor's priority. And then I think for us as a system, we're also looking at how do you create or how do you expand on apprenticeship programs that are not the traditional registered types of programs. I know one of the community colleges, and I believe it's Harper, is looking at a finance, an apprenticeship program around the finance industry. Quality training, and this is really speaking to what kinds of training providers and our expectations for them are. I mentioned earlier about performance and creating a criteria of eligibility for providers, and this is a significant piece in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. How the provider partners with business. So when a student or one of our customers goes through a training program, is there a job at the end of that program? And also, where we talk about the performance and programs that lead to in-demand jobs, Illinois has actually been doing that for several years, and it's a requirement within our policy that the training that the providers do have training programs within those demand occupations. And that list is determined by economic development region and the occupations that are showing growth or current jobs within the area. And also around performance, again, they have to demonstrate that their program leads to a job, increased wages, and then retention, and then also that's for all participants. They also have to show, and this is not just required for us, but they have to show that publicly so that customers can have informed choice. So on our Illinois WorkNet site, we do have all of the training programs that are WIOA approved, because as you see, they have to go through an eligibility process. And included in that isn't just that they're an approved provider, but they also show what their outcomes are. I will have to say, though, if you got on there today, the performance does not yet reflect all student data. It's really still specific to WIOA because we're working with our partners on, again, as I mentioned earlier, how we're going to gather that data. These are the types of training programs that are currently allowed under WIOA. The primary one, and it's what we term the classic one, is an individual training account where I come in, talk to a case career planner within the one-stop, and I want to go to training, and then the one-stop operator issues a voucher to that particular community college or provider just for my tuition. Bridge training, which we've talked about, both Karen mentioned it as well as I did, is another type of training service that we can pay for. Incumbent worker, I mentioned, and the thing about incumbent worker training is that a local board, based on the needs of the area and region, can set aside 20% of their funds, adult and dislocated worker funds, not their youth funds, to go towards incumbent worker training. And again, as I said, that's an increase and an added requirement from the previous program. On-the-job training, which certainly is learn and earn, and we're allowed to pay for a portion and reimburse the wages on a portion. There is a match requirement that's based on the size of the company. And then class-size training, which is, we don't really like to say bundling, but it's the easiest way to describe it, where a local workforce area, if they've got a group of employers, say in manufacturing, that all have a particular need for a training, they can work with a provider and, negotiate a rate for 20 students rather than doing it 20 individual training accounts. And then customized training, that remained the same. That's a 50% wage reimbursement, and that is, I'm an employer that I have a specific training need. I'm introducing a new technology, and we can work with you to pay for that training for your employees.
I just wanted to add a couple things here on this slide under the incumbent worker training. What you have, if you've downloaded this prior to this session, we changed that. We were incorrect on the 20% where we only included dislocated worker funds, and really under WIOA that was expanded to include our adult funds as well. So we want to make sure you realize it's a larger pool of money potentially that can be used with that. And certainly, as Lisa said, these are the primary types of training services. Under WIOA, they've introduced a few different ones that are new that weren't allowed under WIA, including transitional jobs and also pay for performance. There's been very little guidance provided to us from the Department of Labor at this point, so we are still trying to seek some guidance as to what those really look like, and then when we have a better sense of that, we will work with all the local areas, and they'll be working with employers if they do decide to implement those types of training. But certainly, as Lisa said, this is the primary way of going about training is these work-based learning types of training, because people can learn and earn at the same time. For the most part, they're almost guaranteed a job at the end of that training, or an upgraded skill to get them a better wage or a better job, whichever the case may be.
And then our final training service that we want to end with is a registered apprenticeship. And again, one of the things that WIOA did was ease the requirement for them to be put on our provider training list, and they're an automatic. So if they're a registered program through the Department of Labor and they would like to be included on the WIOA training provider list, we are mandated to add them. Of course, they're a mandated partner on the state and local boards. If you complete a registered apprenticeship program, it is considered a post-secondary credential. Then we talked a little bit earlier about pre-apprenticeship training, or just mentioned it as an opportunity for youth. Within a program under WIOA, which is Job Corps, registered apprenticeships are recognized as a career pathway, and then Youth Build, which is not a program that's statewide, can offer work experience in coordination with pre-apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship programs. So I think we went over the, sort of the larger system of WIOA and how that looks broadly. If anybody has any questions, we're certainly happy to entertain them, or if you have comments that you'd like to share, board members or even any of our partners, again, add additional information. And then we've got a question on there. I've mentioned a few webinars that we're going to be doing in the very near future. But if there's other topics that you all would like to hear about, please let us know. You can email Mark or call one of us if you do have something in mind. And hey, Karen, I think it would be a good idea if we just focus one webinar just around education services, like the IETs and Bridge. If you guys would be open to that, Career Tech Ed.
Yeah, we can talk about the work we're doing in with our Career Pathways Enhancement Grant, some of the partnerships that have been built up, the work we're doing with the state goal 60 by 25, and also with trying to get some of the certificates included in our Complete College America work.
Right,
so,
yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So we'll get you on the schedule.
Okay, sounds good.
I think some of the other ones we received at the board meeting in March were some data kind of based discussions. So we are certainly taking that to the strategic planning task force and trying to get a better sense of what data really would be important for both the state and local board members as they develop strategic plans or local plans or regional plans. And determine what best training services are available. So we will be putting just something together for training. And then certainly we may not have used the word enough in this presentation, but business services is a very high priority in Illinois. It's a high priority of WIOA, and we have several working groups, at least two that I'm aware of and part of, that are working on business services teams, development, and how those will be coordinated and work for the system in Fort Illinois, so we could possibly do something on business services at some point in time. But certainly for the state board members that joined us today, the goal is to get to that September meeting with a strategic plan in place to present to everybody. And so we feel there'll be another couple, 2 or 3 webinars along the way that'll help you get the information you need to make wise decisions at that point in time. All right, so if there's no other questions, I want to thank Lisa for the presentation today, also Doug and Karen for imparting information on their particular programs. And if you have any additional questions or suggestions for future, please email Lisa or myself. And thank you again today.